Chapter 16, The Lad with a Silver Button. Across Morven. Here is a regular ferry from Tarosi to Kinlochaline on the mainland. Both shores of the Sound are in the country of the strong clan of the MacLeans, and the people that passed the ferry with me were almost all of that clan. The skipper of the boat, on the other hand, was called Neil Roy Macrob. And since Macrob was one of the names of Alan's clansmen, and Alan himself had sent me to that ferry, I was eager to come to private speech of Neil Roy. In the crowded boat, this was of course impossible, and the passage was a very slow affair. There was no wind, and as the boat was wretchedly equipped, we could pull but 2 oars on one side and 1 on the other. The men gave way, however, with a good will, the passengers taking spells to help them, and the whole company giving the time in Gaelic boat songs. And what with the songs and the sea air and the good nature and spirit of all concerned, and the bright weather, the passage was a pretty thing to have seen. But there was one melancholy part. In the mouth of Loch Aline, we found a great sea-going ship at anchor, and this I supposed at first to be one of the king's cruisers which were kept along that coast, both summer and winter, to prevent communication with the French. As we got a little nearer, it became plain she was a ship of merchandise, and what still more puzzled me, not only her decks, but the sea beach also, were quite black with people, and skiffs were continually plying to and fro between them. Yet nearer, and there began to come to our ears a great sound of mourning, the people on board and those on the shore crying and lamenting one to another so as to pierce the heart. Then I understood this was an emigrant ship bound for the American colonies. We put the ferry boat alongside, and the exiles leaned over bulwarks, weeping and reaching out their hands to my fellow passengers, among whom they counted some near friends. How long this might have gone on I do not know, for they seemed to have no sense of time. But at last the captain of the ship, who seemed near beside himself, and no great wonder, in the midst of this crying and confusion, came to the side and begged us to depart. Thereupon Neil sheered off, and the chief singer in our boat struck into a melancholy air, which was presently taken up both by the emigrants and their friends upon the beach, so that it sounded from all sides like a lament for the dying. I saw the tears run down the cheeks of the men and women in the boat, even as they bent at the oars, and the circumstances and the music of the song, which is one called La Haber No More, were highly affecting even to myself. At Kinlochaline I got Neil Roy upon one side on the beach, and said I made sure he was one of Appin's men. And what for no, said he. I am seeking somebody, said I, and it comes in my mind that you have news of him. Alan Breck Stewart is his name. And very foolishly, instead of showing the button, I sought to pass a shilling in his hand. At this he drew back. I am very much affronted, he said, and this is not the way that one gentleman should behave to another at all. The man you ask for is in France, but if he was in my sporran, says he, and your belly full of shillings, I would not hurt a hair upon a body. I saw I had gone the wrong way to work, and without wasting time upon apologies, showed him the button lying in the hollow of my palm. A wheel, said Neil, and I think ye might have begun with that end of the stick. Whatever. But if ye are the lad with the silver button, all is well, and I have the word to see that ye come safe. But if ye will pardon me to speak plainly, says he, there's a name that you should never take into your mouth, and that is the name of Alan Breck. And there's a thing that you would never do, and that is to offer your dirty money to a Hieland gentleman. It was not very easy to apologize, for I could scarce tell him what was the truth, that I had never dreamed he would set up to be a gentleman until he told me so. Neil, on his part, had no wish to prolong his dealings with me, only to fulfill his orders and be done with it, and he made haste to give me my route. This was to lie the night in Kinlochaline in the public inn, to cross Morven the next day to Ardgour, and lie the night in the house of one John of the Claymore, who was warned that I might come. The third day, to be set across one loch at Corin, and another at Ballichalish, and then ask my way to the house of James of the Glens at Auchin and Dur of Appin. There was a good deal of ferrying, as you hear, the sea in all this part running deep into the mountains and winding about their roots. It makes the country strong to hold and difficult to travel, but full of prodigious wild and dreadful prospects. I had some other advice from Neil, to speak with no one by the way, to avoid Whigs, Campbells, and the Red Soldiers, to leave the road and lie in a bush if I saw any of the latter coming, for it was never chancy to meeting with them, and in brief, to conduct myself like a robber or a Jacobite agent, as perhaps Neil thought me. The inn at Kinlochaline was the most beggarly vile place that ever pigs were stayed in, full of smoke, vermin, and silent Highlanders. I was not only discontented with my lodging, but with myself and my mismanagement of Neil, and thought I could hardly be worse off, but very wrongly, as I was soon to see, for I had not been half an hour at the inn, standing in the door most of the time, to ease my eyes from the peat smoke, when a thunderstorm came close by. The springs broke in a little hill on which the inn stood, and one in a house became a running water. Places of public entertainment were bad enough all over Scotland in those days. Yet it was a wonder to myself, when I had to go from the fireside to the bed in which I slept, wading over the shoes. Early in my next day's journey, I overtook a little, stout, solemn man, walking very slowly with his toes turned out, sometimes reading a book and sometimes marking the place with his finger, and dressed decently and plainly in something of a clerical style. This I found to be another catechist, but of a different order from the blind man of Mull, being indeed one of those sent out by the Edinburgh Society for propagating Christian knowledge, to evangelize the more savage places of the Highlands. His name was Henderland. He spoke with a broad south country tongue, which I was beginning to weary for the sound of, and besides common countryship, we soon found we had a more particular bond of interest. For my good friend, the minister of Ascendian, had translated into the Gaelic in his by time a number of hymns and pious books which Henderland used in his work, and held in great esteem. Indeed, it was one of these he was carrying and reading when we met. We fell in company at once, our ways lying together as far as to Kingerloch. As we went, he stopped and spoke with all the wayfarers and workers that we met or passed, and though of course I could not tell what they discoursed about, yet I judged Mr. Henderland must be well liked in the countryside, for I observed many of them to bring out their moles and share a pinch of snuff with him. I told him as far my affairs as I judged wise, as far, that is, as they were none of Alan's, and gave Ballichlish as a place I was traveling to meet a friend. For I thought Auchern or even Durr would be too particular and might put him on the scent, on his part. He told me much of his work and the people he worked among, the hiding priests and Jacobites, the disarming act, the dress, and many other curiosities of the time and place. He seemed moderate, blaming Parliament in several points, and especially because they had framed the act more severely against those who wore the dress than against those who carried weapons. This moderation put it in my mind to question him of the Red Fox and the Appin tenants, questions which I thought would seem natural enough in the mouth of one traveling to that country. He said it was a bad business. It's wonderful, said he, where the tenants find the money, for their life is mere starvation. You don't carry such a thing as snuff, do you, Mr. Balfour? No. Well, I'm better wanting it. But these tenants, as I was saying, are doubtless partly driven to it. James Stewart and Durr, that's him they call James of the Glens, is half-brother to Ardshiel, the captain of the clan, and he is a man much looked up to and drives very hard. And then there's one they call Alan Breck. Ah! I cried, what of him? What of the wind that bloweth where it listeth, said Henderland. He's here in Alwa, here today and gone tomorrow, a fair heather-cat. He might be glowering at the two of us out of yon wind bush, and I wouldn't wonder. You'll no carry such a thing as snuff, will ye? I told him no, and that he had asked the same thing more than once. It's highly possible, said he, sighing, but it seems strange he shouldn't carry it. However, as I was saying, this Alan Breck is a bold, desperate customer, and well kent to be James's right hand. His life is forfeit already. He would boggle at nathing, and maybe if a tenant body was to hang back, he would get a dirk in his wame. You make a poor story of it all, Mr. Henderland, said I. If it is all fear upon both sides, I care to hear no more of it. Nah, said Mr. Henderland, but there's love too and self-denial that should put the like of you and me to shame. There's something fine about it. No, perhaps Christian, but humanly fine. Even Alan Breck, by all that I hear, is a chield to be respected. There's many a lying sneck draw sits close in kirk in our own part of the country, and stands well in the world's eye, and maybe is a far worse man, Mr. Balfour, than yon misguided shedder of man's blood. We might take a lesson by them. You'll perhaps think I've been too long in the Highlands, he added, smiling to me. I told him not at all, that I had seen much to admire among the Highlanders, and if he came to that, Mr. Campbell himself was a Highlander. Aye, said he, that's true. It's a fine blood. And what is the king's agent about? I asked. Colin Campbell? says Henderland, putting his head in a bee's bike. He is to turn the tenants out by force, I hear, said I. Yes, says he, but the business has gone back and forth, as folks say. First, James of the Glens rode Edinburgh and got some lawyer, a Stewart, nae doubt. They all hang together like bats in a steeple, and had the proceedings stayed. And then Colin Campbell came in again, and had the upper hand before the barons of Exchequer. And now, they tell me the first of the tenants are to flit tomorrow. It's to begin at Durr under James's very windows, which does not seem wise by my humble way of it. Do you think they'll fight? I asked. Well, says Henderland, they're disarmed, or supposed to be, for there's still a good deal of cold iron lying by in quiet places. And then Colin Campbell has the sogers coming. But for all that, if I was his lady wife, I wouldn't be well pleased till I got him home again. They're queer customers, the Appin Stewarts. I asked if they were worse than their neighbors. No, they, said he, and that's the worst part of it. For if Colin Roy can get his business done in Appin, he has it all to begin again in the next country, which they call Mamore, and which is one of the countries of the Camerons. He's king's factor upon both, and from both he has to drive out the tenants. And indeed, Mr. Balfour, to be open with ye, it's my belief that if he escapes the one lot, he'll get his death by the other. So we continued talking and walking the great part of the day, until at last Mr. Henderland, after expressing his delight in my company, and satisfaction at meeting with a friend of Mr. Campbell's, whom, says he, I will make bold call that sweet singer of our covenanted Zion, proposed that I should make a short stage, and lie the night in his house a little beyond Kingerloch. To say truth, I was overjoyed, for I had no great desire for John of the Claymore, and since my double misadventure, first with the guide and next with the gentleman skipper, I stood in some fear of any Highland stranger. Accordingly, we shook hands upon the bargain, and came in the afternoon to a small house, standing alone by the shore of the Linhy Loch. The sun was already gone from the desert mountains of Ardgour upon the hither side, but shone on those of Appin on the farther. The loch lay as still as a lake, only the gulls were crying round the side of it, and the whole place seemed solemn and uncouth. We had no sooner come to the door of Mr. Henderland's dwelling than, to my great surprise, for I was now used to the politeness of Highlanders, he burst rudely past me, dashed into the room, caught up a jar and a small horn spoon, and began ladling snuff into his nose in most excessive quantities. Then he had a hearty fit of sneezing, and looked round upon me with a rather silly smile. It's a vow I took, says he. I took a vow upon me that I wouldn't carry it. Doubtless it's a great privation. But when I think upon the martyrs, not only to the Scottish covenant, but to other points of Christianity, I think shame to mind it. As soon as we had eaten, and porridge and whey was the best of the good man's diet, he took a grave face and said he had a duty to perform by Mr. Campbell, and that was to inquire into my state of mind towards God. I was inclined to smile at him since the business of the snuff, but he had not spoken long before he brought the tears into my eyes. There are two things that men should never weary of: goodness and humility. We get none too much of them in this rough world among cold, proud people, but Mr. Henderland had their very speech upon his tongue. And though I was a good deal puffed up with my adventures, and with having come off, as the saying is, with flying colors, yet he soon had me on my knees beside a simple, poor old man, and both proud and glad to be there. Before we went to bed, he offered me sixpence to help me on my way, out of a scanty store he kept in the turf wall of his house, at which excess of goodness I knew not what to do. But at last he was so earnest with me that I thought it the more manly part to let him have his way, and so left him poorer than myself. Chapter 17, The Death of the Red Fox. Next day, Mr. Henderland found for me a man who had a boat of his own, and was to cross the Linhy Loch that afternoon into Appin, fishing. Him he prevailed on to take me, for he was one of his flock, and in this way I saved a long day's travel and the price of the 2 public ferries I must otherwise have passed. It was near noon before we set out, a dark day with clouds, and the sun shining upon little patches. The sea was here very deep and still, and had scarce a wave upon it, so that I must put the water to my lips before I could believe it to be truly salt. The mountains on either side were high, rough, and barren, very black and gloomy in the shadow of the clouds, but all silver-laced with little watercourses where the sun shone upon them. It seemed a hard country, this of Appin, for people to care as much about as Alan did. There was but one thing to mention. A little after we had started, The sun shone upon a little moving clump of scarlet close and along the waterside to the north. It was much the same red as soldiers' coats. Every now and then, too, there came little sparks and lightnings, as though the sun had struck upon bright steel. I asked my boatman what it should be, and he answered he supposed it was some of the red soldiers coming from Fort William into Appin against the poor tenantry of the country. Well, it was a sad sight to me, and whether it was because of my thoughts of Alan or from something prophetic in my bosom, although this was the second time I had seen King George's troops, I had no goodwill to them. At last we came so near the point of land at the entering in of Loch Laven that I begged to be set on shore. My boatman, who was an honest fellow and mindful of his promise to the catechist, would fain have carried me on to Balachalish, but as this was to take me farther from my secret destination, I insisted, and was set on shore at last on the wood of Lettermore or Lettervore, for I have heard it both ways. In Alan's country of Appin, this was a wood of birches, growing on a steep, craggy side of a mountain that overhung the loch. It had many openings and ferny howes, and a road or bridle track ran north and south through the midst of it, by the edge of which, where was a spring, I sat down to eat some oat bread of Mr. Henderland's and think upon my situation. Here I was not only troubled by a cloud of stinging midges, but far more by the doubts of my mind. What I ought to do, why I was going to join myself with an outlaw and a would-be murderer like Alan, whether I should not be acting more like a man of sense to tramp back to the south country direct, by my own guidance and at my own charges, and what Mr. Campbell or even Mr. Henderland would think of me if they should ever learn my folly and presumption. These were the doubts that now began to come on me stronger than ever. As I was so sitting and thinking, a sound of men and horses came to me through the wood, and presently after, at a turning of the road, I saw 4 travelers come into view. The way was in this part so rough and narrow that they came single and led their horses by the reins. The first was a great, red-headed gentleman of an imperious and flushed face, who carried his hat in his hand and fanned himself, for he was in a breathing heat. The second, by his decent black garb and white wig, I correctly took to be a lawyer. The third was a servant, and wore some part of his clothes in tartan, which showed that his master was a Highland family, and either an outlaw or else in singular good odor with the government, since the wearing of tartan was against the act. If I had been better versed in these things, I would have known the tartan to be of the Argyle or Campbell colors. This servant had a good-sized portmanteau strapped on his horse and a net of lemons to brew punch with, hanging at the saddle-bow, as was often enough the custom with luxurious travelers in that part of the country. As for the fourth, who brought up the tale, I had seen his like before, and knew him at once to be a sheriff's officer. I had no sooner seen these people coming than I made up my mind, for no reason that I can tell, to go through with my adventure, and when the first came alongside of me, I rose up from the bracken, and asked him the way to Auchern. He stopped and looked at me, as I thought, a little oddly, and then, turning to the lawyer, "Mungo," said he, "there's many a man would think this more of a warning than 2 peats. Here am I on my road to dur on the job he can, and here is a young lad starts up out of the bracken, and speers if I am on the way to Auchern." "Glenure," said the other, "this is no subject for jesting." These 2 had now drawn close up, and were gazing at me, while the 2 followers had halted about a stone cast in the rear. "And what seek ye in Auchern?" said Colin Roy Campbell of Glenure. Him they called the Red Fox, for he it was that I had stopped. "The man that lives there," said I. "James of the Glens," says Glenure, musingly. And then to the lawyer, "Is he gathering his people, think ye?" "Anyway," says the lawyer, "we shall do better to bide where we are, and let the soldiers rally us." "If you're concerned for me," said I am neither of his people nor yours, but an honest subject of King George, owing no man and fearing no man." "Why, very well said," replies the factor. "But if I may make so bold as ask, what is this honest man so far from his country? And why does he come seeking the brother of Ardshiel? I have power here, I must tell you. I am king's factor upon several of these estates, and have 12 files of soldiers at my back. I have heard a waif word in the country," said I, a little nettled, "that you are a hard man to drive." He still kept looking at me, as if in doubt. "Well," said he at last, "your tongue is bold, but I am no unfriend to plainness. If ye had asked me the way to the door of James Stewart on any other day but this, I would have set ye right and bidden ye Godspeed. But today, Mungo, And he turned again to look at the lawyer. But just as he turned, there came the shot of a firelock from higher up the hill, and with the very sound of it, Glenure fell upon the road. "Oh, I am dead," he cried several times over. The lawyer had caught him up and held him in his arms, the servant standing over and clasping his hands. And now the wounded man looked from one to another with scared eyes, and there was a change in his voice that went to the heart. "Take care of yourselves," says he. "I am dead." He tried to open his clothes as if to look for the wound, but his fingers slipped on the buttons. With that he gave a great sigh, his head rolled on his shoulder, and he passed away. The lawyer said never a word, but his face was as sharp as a pen and as white as a dead man's. The servant broke out into a great noise of crying and weeping like a child, and I, on my side, stood staring at them in a kind of horror. The sheriff's officer had run back at the first sound of the shot to hasten the coming of the soldiers. At last the lawyer laid down the dead man and his blood upon the road, and got to his own feet with a kind of stagger. I believe it was his movement that brought me to my senses, for he had no sooner done so than I began to scramble up the hill, crying out, "The murderer! The murderer!" So little a time had elapsed that when I got to the top of the first steepness, and could see some part of the open mountain, the murderer was still moving away at no great distance. He was a big man in a black coat, with metal buttons, and carried a long fowling piece. "Here," I cried, "I see him." At that the murderer gave a little, quick look over his shoulder and began to run. The next moment he was lost in a fringe of birches. Then he came out again on the upper side, where I could see him climbing like a jackanapes, for that part was again very steep. And then he dipped behind a shoulder, and I saw him no more. All this time I had been running on my side, and had got a good way up, when a voice cried upon me to stand. I was at the edge of the upper wood, and so now, when I halted and looked back, I saw all the open part of the hill below me. The lawyer and the sheriff's officer were standing just above the road, crying and waving on me to come back, and on their left, the redcoats, musket in hand, were beginning to struggle singly out of the lower wood. Why should I come back? I cried, "Come you on." "£10 if ye take that lad," cried the lawyer. "He's an accomplice. He was posted here to hold us in talk." At that word, which I could hear quite plainly, though it was to the soldiers and not to me that he was crying it, my heart came in my mouth with quite a new kind of terror. Indeed, it is one thing to stand the danger of your life, and quite another to run the peril of both life and character. The thing, besides, had come so suddenly, like thunder out of a clear sky, that I was all amazed and helpless. The soldiers began to spread, some of them to run, and others to put up their pieces and cover me. And still I stood. "Juke in here among the trees," said a voice close by. "Duck." Indeed, I scarce knew what I was doing, but I obeyed, and as I did so, I heard the firelocks bang and the balls whistle in the birches. Just inside the shelter of the trees, I found Alan Breck standing with a fishing rod. He gave me no salutation. Indeed, it was no time for civilities. "Only come," says he, and set off running along the side of the mountain towards Ballichlish, and I, like a sheep, to follow him. Now we ran among the birches, now stooping behind low humps upon the mountainside, now crawling on all fours among the heather. The pace was deadly. My heart seemed bursting against my ribs, and I had neither time to think nor breath to speak with. Only I remember seeing with wonder that Alan every now and then would straighten himself to his full height and look back, and every time he did so, there came a great faraway cheering and crying of the soldiers. Quarter of an hour later, Alan stopped, clapped down flat in the heather, and turned to me. "Now," said he, "it's earnest. Do as I do for your life." And at the same speed, but now with infinitely more precaution, we traced back again across the mountainside by the same way that we had come, only perhaps higher, till at last Alan threw himself down in the upper wood of Lettermore, where I had found him at the first, and lay, with his face in bracken, panting like a dog. My own side so ached, my head so swam, my tongue so hung out of my mouth with heat and dryness, that I lay beside him like one dead. Chapter 18 I talked with Alan in the wood of Lettermore. Lon was the first to come round. He rose, went to border the wood, peered out a little, and then returned and sat down. "Well," said he, "yon was a hot burst, David." I said nothing, nor so much as lifted my face. I had seen murder done, and a great, ruddy, jovial gentleman struck out of life in a moment. The pity of that sight was still sore within me, and yet that was but a part of my concern. Here was murder done upon the man Alan hated. Here was Alan skulking in the trees and running from the troops, and whether his was a hand that fired or only the head that ordered, signified but little. By my way of it, my only friend in that wild country was blood guilty in the first degree. I held him in horror. I could not look upon his face. I would have rather lain alone in the rain on my cold isle than in that warm beside a murderer. "Are ye still wearied?" he asked again. "No," said I, still with my face in the bracken. "No, I am not wearied now, and I can speak. You and me must twine," I said. "I liked you very well, Alan, but your ways are not mine, and they're not God's, and the short and the long of it is just that we must twine. Part. I will hardly twine from ye, David, without some kind of reason for the same," said Alan mighty gravely. "If ye can anything against my reputation, it's the least thing that ye should do, for old acquaintance' sake, to let me hear the name of it. And if ye have only taken a distaste to my society, it will be proper for me to judge if I'm insulted." "Alan," said I, "what is the sense of this?" "Ye ken very well yon Campbell man lies in his blood upon the road." He was silent for a little. Then says he, "Did ever ye hear tell the story of the man and the good people?" By which he meant the fairies. "No," said I, "nor do I want to hear it." "With your permission, Mr. Balfour, I will tell it you whatever," says Alan. "The man, ye should ken, was cast upon a rock in the sea, where it appears the good people were in use to come and rest as they went through to Ireland. The name of this rock is called the Scaravore, and it's not far from where we suffered shipwreck. Well, it seems a man cried so sore if he could just see his little bairn before he died, that at last the king of the good people took pity upon him, and sent one fly that brought back the bairn in a poke and laid it down beside a man where he lay sleeping. So when the man woke, there was a poke beside him and something into the inside of it that moved. Well, it seems it was one of these gentry that think the worst of things, and for greater security, he stuck his dirk throughout that poke before he opened it, and there was his bairn dead. I am thinking to myself, Mr. Balfour, that you and the man are very much alike." "Bag, do you mean you had no hand in it?" cried I, sitting up. "I will tell you first of all, Mr. Balfour Shaws, as one friend to another," said Alan, "that if I were going to kill a gentleman, it would not be in my own country, to bring trouble on my clan, and I would not go wanting sword and gun, and with long fishing rod upon my back." "Well," said I, "that's true. And now," continued Alan, taking out his dirk and laying his hand upon it in a certain manner, "I swear upon the holy iron I had neither art nor part, act nor thought in it." "I thank God for that," cried I, and offered him my hand. He did not appear to see it. "And here is a great deal of work about a Campbell," said he. "They are not so scarce that I can." "At least," said I, "you cannot justly blame me, for you know very well what you told me in the brig. But the temptation and the act are different. I thank God again for that. We may all be tempted, but to take a life in cold blood, Alan," and I could say no more for the moment. "And do you know who did it?" I added, "Do you know that man in the black coat?" "I have nae clear mind about his coat," said Alan cunningly, "but it sticks in my head that it was blue." "Blue or black, did ye know him?" said I. "I couldn't just conscientiously swear to him," says Alan. He geed very close by me, to be sure, but it's a strange thing that I should just have been tying my brogues. "Can you swear that you don't know him, Alan?" I cried, half angered, half in a mind to laugh at his evasions. "Not yet," says he, "but I've a grand memory for forgetting David." "And yet there was one thing I saw clearly," said I, "and that was that you exposed yourself and me to draw the soldiers." "It's very likely," said Alan, "and so would any gentleman. You and me were innocent of that transaction. The better reason, since we were falsely suspected, that we should get clear." I cried, "The innocent should surely come before the guilty." "Why, David," said he, "the innocent have I a chance to get ass-oiled in court, but for the lad that shot the bullet, I think the best place for him will be the heather. Them that haven't dipped their hands in any little difficulty should be very mindful of the case of them that have, and that is the good Christianity." For if it was the other way roundabout, and the lad whom I could need just clearly see had been in our shoes, and we in his, as might very well have been, I think we would be a good deal obliged to him ourselves if he would draw the soldiers. When it came to this, I gave Alan up, but he looked so innocent all the time, and was in such clear good faith in what he said, and so ready to sacrifice himself for what he deemed his duty, that my mouth was closed. Mr. Henderland's words came back to me, that we ourselves might take a lesson by these wild Highlanders. Well, here I had taken mine. Alan's morals were all tail first, but he was ready to give his life for them, such as they were. Alan, said I'll not say it's a good Christianity as I understand it, but it's good enough, and here I offer ye my hand for the second time. Whereupon he gave me both of his, saying surely I had cast a spell upon him, for he could forgive me anything. Then he grew very grave, and said we had not much time to throw away, but must both flee that country. He, because he was a deserter, and the whole of Appin would now be searched like a chamber, and everyone obliged to give good account of himself. And I, because I was certainly involved in the murder. Oh, says I, willing to give him a little lesson, I have no fear of the justice of my country. As if this was your country, said he, or as if you would be tried here, in a country of Stewarts. It's all Scotland, said I. Man, I whiles wonder at ye, said Alan. This is a Campbell that's been killed. Well, it'll be tried in Inverara, the Campbell's head place, with 15 Campbells in the jury box, and the biggest Campbell of all, and that's the Duke, sitting cocking on the bench. Justice, David? The same justice, by all the world, as Glenure found a while ago at the roadside. This frightened me a little, I confess, and would have frightened me more if I had known how nearly exact were Alan's predictions. Indeed, it was but in one point that he exaggerated, there being but 11 Campbells on the jury, though as the other 4 equally in the Duke's dependence. It mattered less than might appear. Still, I cried out that he was unjust to the Duke of Argyll, who, for all he was a Whig, was yet a wise and honest nobleman. Hoot, said Alan, the man's a Whig, nae doubt, but I would never deny he was a good chieftain to his clan. And what would the clan think if there was a Campbell shot and naebody hanged, and their own chief the Justice General? But I have often observed, says Alan, that you low country bodies have no clear idea of what's right and wrong. At this I did at last laugh out aloud, when to my surprise, Alan joined in and laughed as merrily as myself. Nah, said he, we're in the Highlands, David, and when I tell you to run, take my word and run. Nae doubt it's a hard thing to skulk and starve in the heather, but it's harder yet to lie shackled in a redcoat prison. I asked him whither we should flee, and as he told me to the lowlands, I was a little better inclined to go with him, for indeed, I was growing impatient to get back and have the upper hand of my uncle. Besides, Alan made so sure there would be no question of justice in the matter, that I began to be afraid he might be right. Of all deaths, I would truly like least to die by the gallows, and the picture of that uncanny instrument came into my head with extraordinary clearness, as I had once seen it engraved at the top of a peddler's ballad, and took away my appetite for courts of justice. I'll chance it, Alan, said I. I'll go with you. But mind you, said Alan, it's no small thing. Ye maun lie bare and hard, and brook many an empty belly. Your bed shall be the moorcock's, and your life shall be like the hunted deer's, and ye shall sleep with your hand upon your weapons. Aye, man, ye shall tagle many a weary foot, or we get clear. I tell ye this at the start, for the life that I ken well. But if ye ask what other chance ye have, I answer, none, either take to the heather with me, or else hang. And that's a choice very easily made, said I, and we shook hands upon it. And now let's take another peek at the redcoats, says Alan, and he led me to the northeastern fringe of the wood. Looking out between the trees, we could see a great side of mountain, running down exceeding steep into the waters of the loch. It was a rough part, all hanging stone and heather and big scrogs of birchwood, and away at the far end towards Ballichlish, little wee red soldiers were dipping up and down over hill and howe, and growing smaller every minute. There was no cheering now, for I think they had other uses for what breath was left them, but they still stuck to the trail, and doubtless thought that we were close in front of them. Alan watched them, smiling to himself. I said, they'll be gay weary before they got to the end of that employ. And so you and me, David, can sit down and eat a bite and breathe a bit longer and take a dram from my bottle. Then we'll strike for Auchern, the house of my kinsman, James of the Glens, where I must get my clothes and my arms and money to carry us along. And then David will cry, 'Forth, fortune,' and take a cast among the heather." So we sat again and ate and drank, in a place whence we could see the sun going down into a field of great, wild, and houseless mountains, such as I was now condemned to wander in with my companion. Partly as we so sat, and partly afterwards, on the way to Auchern, each of us narrated his adventures, and I shall here set down so much of Alan's as seems either curious or needful. It appears he ran to the bulwarks as soon as the wave was past, saw me and lost me, and saw me again as I tumbled in the roost, and at last had one glimpse of me clinging on the yard. It was this that put him in some hope I would maybe get a land after all, and made him leave those clues and messages which had brought me from my sins to that unlucky country of Appin. In the meanwhile, those still on the brig had got the skiff launched, and one or two were on board her already, when there came a second wave greater than the first, and heaved the brig out of her place, and would certainly have sent her to bottom, had she not struck and caught on some projection of the reef. When she had struck first, it had been bows on, so that the stern had hitherto been lowest. But now her stern was thrown in the air, and the bows plunged under the sea. And with that, the water began to pour into fore scuttle like the pouring of a mill dam. It took the color out of Alan's face, even to tell what followed, for there were still 2 men lying impotent in their bunks. And these, seeing the water pour in and thinking the ship had foundered, began to cry out aloud. And that with such harrowing cries that all who were on deck tumbled one after another into the skiff and fell to their oars. They were not 200 yards away when there came a third great sea, and at that the brig lifted clean over the reef. Her canvas filled for a moment, and she seemed to sail in chase of them, but settling all the while, and presently she drew down and down, as if a hand was drawing her, and the sea closed over the covenant of Dysart. Never a word they spoke as they pulled ashore, being stunned with the horror of that screaming. But they had scarce set foot upon the beach when Hosea's son woke up, as if out of muse, and bade them lay hands upon Alan. They hung back indeed, having little taste for the employment. But Hosea's son was like a fiend, crying that Alan was alone, that he had a great sum about him, that he had been the means of losing the brig and drowning all their comrades, and that here was both revenge and wealth upon a single cast. It was 7 against 1. In that part of the shore there was no rock that Alan could set his back to, and the sailors began to spread out and come behind him. And then, said Alan, the little man with the red head, I haven't any mind of the name that he is called. Rioch, said I. I said, Alan, Rioch, well, it was him that took up the clubs for me, asked the men if they were any feared of a judgment, and, says he, I'll put my back to the Highlandman's missile. That's none such an entirely bad little man. Yon little man with the red head, said Alan. He has some spunks of decency. Well, said I, he was kind to me in his way. And so he was to Alan, said he, and by my troth, I found his way a very good one. But ye see, David, the loss of the ship and cries of these poor lads sat very ill upon the man, and I'm thinking that would be the cause of it. Well, I would think so, says I, for he was as keen as any of the rest at the beginning. But how did Hosea's son take it? It sticks in my mind that he would take it very ill, says Alan. But the little man cried to me to run, and indeed, I thought it was a good observe and ran. The last that I saw, they were all in a knot upon the beach, like folk that were not agreeing very well together. What do you mean by that? Said I. Well, the fists were going, said Alan, and I saw one man go down like a pair of breeks. But I thought it would be better no to wait. Ye see there's a strip of Campbell's in that end of Mull, which is no good company for a gentleman like me. If it hadn't been for that, I would have waited and looked for ye missile, let alone giving a hand to the little man. It was droll how Alan dwelt on Mr. Rioch's stature, for, to say the truth, the one was not much smaller than the other. So, says he, continuing, I set my best foot forward, and whenever I met him with anyone, I cried out there was a wreck ashore. Man, they didn't stop to fash with me. You should have seen them linking for the beach. And when they got there, they found they had had the pleasure of a run, which is good for a Campbell. I'm thinking it was a judgment on the clan that the brig went down in the lump and didn't break. But it was a very unlucky thing for you, that same. For if any wreck had come ashore, they would have hunted high and low, and would soon have found ye. Chapter 19, The House of Fear. It fell as we were walking, and the clouds, which had broken up in the afternoon, settled in and thickened, so that it fell, for the season of the year, extremely dark. The way we went was over rough mountainsides, and though Alan pushed on with an assured manner, I could by no means see how he directed himself. At last, about 10:30, we came to the top of a brae, and saw lights below us. It seemed a house door stood open and let out a beam of fire and candlelight, and all round the house and steading 5 or 6 persons were moving hurriedly about, each carrying a lighted brand. "James must have tinned his wits," said Alan. "If this was the soldiers instead of you and me, he would be in a bonny mess. But I dare say he'll have a sentry on the road, and he would ken well enough no soldiers would find the way that we came." Hereupon he whistled 3 times, in a particular manner. It was strange to see how, at the first sound of it, all the moving torches came to a stand, as if the bearers were affrighted, and how, at the third, the bustle began again as before. Having thus set folks' minds at rest, we came down the brae, and were met at the yard gate, for this place was like a well-doing farm, by a tall, handsome man of more than 50, who cried out to Alan in the Gaelic. "James Stewart," said Alan, "I will ask ye to speak in Scotch, for here is a young gentleman with me that is none of the other. This is him," he added, putting his arm through mine. "A young gentleman of the lowlands, and a laird in his country too, but I am thinking it will be the better for his health if we give his name to go by." James of the Glens turned to me for a moment, and greeted me courteously enough. The next he had turned to Alan. "This has been a dreadful accident," he cried. "It will bring trouble on the country." And he wrung his hands. "Hoots," said Alan, "you must take the sour with the sweet, man. Colin Roy is dead, and be thankful for that." "Aye," said James, "and by my troth, I wish he was alive again. It's all very fine to blow and boast beforehand, but now it's done, Alan, and who's to bear the weight of it? The accident fell out in Appin. Mind ye that, Alan, it's Appin that must pay, and I am a man that has a family." Blame. While this was going on, I looked about me at the servants. Some were on ladders, digging the thatch of the house or the farm buildings, from which they brought out guns, swords, and different weapons of war. Others carried them away, and by the sound of mattock blows from somewhere farther down the brae, I suppose they buried them. Though they were all so busy, there prevailed no kind of order in their efforts. Men struggled together for the same gun and ran into each other with their burning torches, and James was continually turning about from his talk with Alan to cry out orders which were apparently never understood. The faces in the torchlight were like those of people overborne with hurry and panic, and though none spoke above his breath, their speech sounded both anxious and angry. It was about this time that a lassie came out of the house carrying a pack or bundle, and it has often made me smile to think how Alan's instinct awoke at the mere sight of it. "What's that the lassie has?" he asked. "We're just setting the house in order, Alan," said James, in his frightened and somewhat fawning way. "They'll search Appin with candles, and we must have all things straight. We're digging the big guns and swords into the moss, ye see, and these, I am thinking, will be your ain French clothes. We'll be to bury them, I believe." "Bury my French clothes," cried Alan. "Troth, no." And he laid hold upon the packet, and retired into the barn to shift himself, recommending me in the meanwhile to his kinsman. James carried me accordingly into the kitchen, and sat down with me at table, smiling and talking at first in a very hospitable manner. But presently the gloom returned upon him. He sat frowning and biting his fingers, only remembered me from time to time, and then gave me but a word or two and a poor smile, and back into his private terrors. His wife sat by the fire and wept, with her face in her hands. His eldest son was crouched upon the floor, running over a great mass of papers, and now and again setting one alight and burning it to the bitter end. All the while a servant lass with a red face was rummaging about the room, in a blind hurry of fear, and whimpering as she went, and every now and again one of the men would thrust in his face from the yard, and cry for orders. At last James could keep his seat no longer, and begged my permission to be so unmannerly as walk about. "I am but poor company altogether, sir," says he, "but I can think of nothing but this dreadful accident, and the trouble is like to bring upon quite innocent persons." A little after he observed his son burning a paper, which he thought should have been kept, and at that his excitement burst out, so that it was painful to witness. He struck the lad repeatedly. "Are you gone, Jite?" he cried. "Do you wish to hang your father?" And forgetful of my presence, carried on at him a long time together in the Gaelic, the young man answering nothing, only the wife, at the name of hanging, throwing her apron over her face and sobbing out louder than before. Mad. This was all wretched for a stranger like myself to hear and see, and I was right glad when Alan returned, looking like himself in his fine French clothes, though to be sure, they were now grown almost too battered and withered to deserve the name of fine. I was then taken out of my turn by another of the sons, and given that change of clothing of which I had stood so long in need, and a pair of Highland brogues made of deer leather, rather strange at first, but after a little practice very easy to defeat. By the time I came back, Alan must have told his story, for it seemed understood that I was to fly with him, and they were all busy upon our equipment. They gave us each a sword and pistols, though I professed my inability to use the former, and with these and some ammunition, a bag of oatmeal, an iron pan, and a bottle of right French brandy, we were ready for the heather. Money, indeed, was lacking. I had about 2 guineas left, Alan's belt having been dispatched by another hand. That trusty messenger had no more than 17 pence to his whole fortune, and as for James, it appears he had brought himself so low with journeys to Edinburgh and legal expenses on behalf of the tenants, that he could only scrape together 3 and 5 pence halfpenny, the most of it in coppers. "This'll no do," said Alan. "You must find a safe bit somewhere nearby," said James, "and get word sent to me. Ye see, you'll have to get this business prettily off, Alan. This is no time to be stayed for a guinea or 2. They're sure to get wind of ye, sure to seek ye, and by my way of it, sure to lay on ye the white of this day's accident. If it falls on you, it falls on me that am your near kinsman, and harboured ye while ye were in the country. And if it comes on me," he paused and bit his fingers with a white face. "It would be a painful thing for our friends if I was to hang," said he. "It would be an ill day for Appin," says Alan. "It's a day that sticks in my throat," said James. "Oh, man, Alan, you and me have spoken like 2 fools," he cried, striking his hand upon the wall so that the house rang again. "Well, and that's true, too," said Alan. "And my friend in the lowlands here," nodding at me, "gave me a good word upon that head, if I would only have listened to him. But see here," said James, returning to his former manner, "if they lay me by the heels, Alan, it's then that you'll be needing the money. For with all that I have said and that you have said, it will look very black against the 2 of us. Do ye mark that? Well, follow me out and I'll see that I'll have to get paper out against ye missile. Have to offer a reward for ye. Aye, will I? It's a sore thing to do between such near friends. But if I get the dirt of this dreadful accident, I'll have to fend for myself, man. Do ye see that?" Blame. He spoke with a pleading earnestness, taking Alan by the breast of the coat. "I said, Alan, I see that. And ye'll have to be clear of the country, Alan. Aye, and clear of Scotland, you and your friend from the lowlands, too. For I'll have to paper your friend from the lowlands. Ye see that, Alan, say that ye see that." I thought Alan flushed a bit. "This is unco hard on me that brought him here, James," said he, throwing his head back. "It's like making me a traitor." "Now, Alan, man," cried James, "look things in the face. He'll be papered anyway. Mungo Campbell be sure to paper him. What matters if I paper him too? And then, Alan, I am a man that has a family." And then, after a little pause on both sides, "And, Alan, it'll be a jury of Campbells," said he. "There's one thing," said Alan musingly, "that naebody kens his name, nor yet they shall nie. Alan, there's my hand on that," cried James, for all the world as if he had really known my name and was foregoing some advantage. But just the habit he was in, and what he looked like in his age and the like, I couldn't well do less. "I wonder at your father, son," cried Alan, sternly. "Would ye sell the lad with a gift? Would ye change his clothes and then betray him?" No, Alan," said James. No. The habit he took off, the habit Mungo saw him in. But I thought he seemed crestfallen. Indeed, he was clutching at every straw, and all the time, I dare say, saw the faces of his hereditary foes on the bench, and in the jury box, and the gallows in the background. "Well, sir," says Alan, turning to me, "what say ye to that? Ye are here under the safeguard of my honor, and it's my part to see nothing done but what shall please you." "I have but one word to say," said I, For to all this dispute I am a perfect stranger. But the plain common sense is to set the blame where it belongs, and that is on the man who fired the shot. Paper him, as he call it. Set the hunt on him, and let honest, innocent folk show their faces in safety. But at this both Alan and James cried out in horror, bidding me hold my tongue, for that was not bethought of, and asking me what the Camerons would think, which confirmed me. It must have been a Cameron from a moor that did the act, and if I did not see that the lad might be caught. Ye haven't surely thought of that, said they, with such innocent earnestness, that my hands dropped at my side, and I despaired of argument. Very well, then, said I, paper me, if you please, paper Alan, paper King George. We're all three innocent, and that seems to be what's wanted. But at least, sir, said I to James, recovering from my little fit of annoyance, I am Alan's friend, and if I can be helpful to friends of his, I will not stumble at the risk. I thought it best to put fair face on my consent, for I saw Alan troubled. And besides, thinks I to myself, as soon as my back is turned, they will paper me, as they call it, whether I consent or not. But in this I saw I was wrong, for I had no sooner said the words than Mrs. Stewart leaped out of her chair, came running over to us, and wept first upon my neck and then on Alan's, blessing God for our goodness to her family. As for you, Alan, it was no more than your bounden duty, she said. But for this lad that has come here and seen us at our worst, and seen the goodman fleeching like a suitor, him that by right should give his commands like any king. As for you, my lad, she says, my heart is way not to have your name, but I have your face, and as long as my heart beats under my bosom, I will keep it and think of it and bless it. And with that she kissed me, and burst once more into such sobbing that I stood abashed. Hoot, hoot, said Alan, looking mighty silly. The day comes unco soon in this month of July, and tomorrow there be a fine to do in Appin, a fine riding of dragoons, and crying of cruacan, and running of redcoats, and behoves you and me to the sooner be gone. The rallying word of the Campbells. Thereupon we said farewell, and set out again, bending somewhat eastwards in a fine, mild, dark night, and over much the same broken country as before. Chapter 20. The Flight in the Heather. The Rocks. Sometimes we walked, sometimes ran, and as it drew on to morning, walked ever the less and ran the more. Though upon its face, that country appeared to be a desert, yet there were huts and houses of the people, of which we must have passed more than 20, hidden in quiet places of the hills. When we came to one of these, Alan would leave me in the way, and go himself and rap upon the side of the house, and speak a while at the window, with some sleeper awakened. This was to pass the news, which in that country was so much of a duty that Alan must pause to attend to it even while fleeing for his life, and so well attended by others, that in more than half of the houses were we called they had heard already of the murder. In the others, as well as I could make out, standing back at a distance and hearing a strange tongue, the news was received with more consternation than surprise. For all our hurry, day began to come in while we were still far from any shelter. It found us in a prodigious valley, strewn with rocks, and where ran a foaming river. Wild mountains stood around it. There grew there neither grass nor trees, and I have sometimes thought since then that it may have been a valley called Glencoe, where the massacre was in the time of King William. But for the details of our itinerary, I am all to seek, our way lying now by short cuts, now by great detours, our pace being so hurried, our time of journeying usually by night, and the names of such places as I asked and heard being the Gaelic tongue, and the more easily forgotten, the first peep of morning, then showed us this horrible place, and I could see Alan knit his brow. This is no fit place for you and me, he said. This is a place they're bound to watch. And with that he ran harder than ever down to the waterside, in a part where the river was split in two among 3 rocks. It went through with a horrid thundering that made my belly quake, and there hung over the lint a little mist of spray. Alan looked neither to the right nor to the left, but jumped clean upon the middle rock, and fell there on his hands and knees to check himself, for that rock was small, and he might have pitched over on the far side. I had scarce time to measure the distance, or to understand the peril before I had followed him, and he had caught and stopped me. So there we stood, side by side upon a small rock slippery with spray, a far broader leap in front of us, and the river dinning upon all sides. When I saw where I was, there came on me a deadly sickness of fear, and I put my hand over my eyes. Alan took me and shook me. I saw he was speaking, but the roaring of the falls and the trouble in my mind prevented me from hearing. Only I saw his face was red with anger, and that he stamped upon the rock. The same look showed me the water raging by, and the mist hanging in the air, and with that I covered my eyes again and shuddered. The next minute Alan had set the brandy bottle to my lips, and forced me to drink about a gill, which sent the blood into my head again. Then, putting his hands to his mouth and his mouth to my ear, he shouted, "Hang or drown!" and turning his back upon me, leaped over the farther branch of the stream and landed safe. I was now alone upon the rock, which gave me the more room. The brandy was singing in my ears. I had this good example fresh before me, and just wit enough to see that if I did not leap at once, I should never leap at all. I bent low on my knees and flung myself forth, with that kind of anger and despair that has sometimes stood me instead of courage. Sure enough, it was but my hands that reached the full length. These slipped, caught again, slipped again, and I was slittering back into the linn, when Alan seized me, first by the hair, then by the collar, and with a great strain dragged me into safety. Never a word, he said, but set off running again for his life, and I must stagger to my feet and run after him. I had been weary before, but now I was sick and bruised and partly drunken with the brandy. I kept stumbling as I ran. I had a stitch that came near to overmaster me, and when at last Alan paused under a great rock that stood there among a number of others, it was none too soon for David Balfour. A great rock, I have said, but by rights it was two rocks leaning together at the top, both some 20 feet high, and at the first sight inaccessible. Even Alan, though you may say he had as good as 4 hands, failed twice in an attempt to climb them, and it was only at the third trial, and then by standing on my shoulders and leaping up with such force as I thought must have broken my collarbone, that he secured a lodgment. Once there, he let down his leathern girdle, and with the aid of that and a pair of shallow footholds in the rock, I scrambled up beside him. Then I saw why we had come there. For the two rocks, being both somewhat hollow on the top and sloping one to the other, made a kind of dish or saucer, where as many as 3 or 4 men might have lain hidden. All this while Alan had not said a word, and had run and climbed with such a savage, silent frenzy of hurry, that I knew that he was in mortal fear of some miscarriage. Even now we were on the rock, he said nothing, nor so much as relaxed a frowning look upon his face, but clapped flat down, and keeping only one eye above the edge of our place of shelter, scouted all round the compass. The dawn had come quite clear. We could see the stony sides of the valley and its bottom, which was bestrewed with rocks, and the river, which went from one side to another and made white falls, but no the smoke of a house, nor any living creature but some eagles screaming round a cliff. Then at last Alan smiled. "Aye," said he, "now we have a chance." And then looking at me with some amusement, "You're no very gleg to jumping," said he, brisk. At this I suppose I colored with mortification, for he added at once, "Hoots! Small blame to ye. To be feared of a thing and yet to do it is what makes the prettiest kind of a man." And then there was water there, and water's a thing that dauntins even me. "No, no," said Alan. "It's no you that's to blame, it's me." I asked him why. "Why," said he, "I have proved myself a gomeril this night. For first of all, I take a wrong road, and that in my own country it happened, so that the day has caught us where we should never been. And thanks to that, we lie here in some danger and mere discomfort. And next, which is the worst of the two, for a man that has been so much among the heather as myself, I have come wanting a water bottle, and here we lie for a long summer's day with nathing but neat spirit. Ye may think that a small matter, but before it comes night, David, ye'll give me news of it." I was anxious to redeem my character, and offered, if he would pour out the brandy, to run down and fill the bottle at the river. "I wouldn't waste a good spirit either," says he. "It's been a good friend to you this night, or in my poor opinion, you would still be cocking on yon stone. And what's mair," says he, "ye may have observed, you that a man of so much penetration, that Alan Breck Stewart was perhaps walking quicker than his ordinary." "You," I cried, "you were running fit to burst." "Was I so?" said he. "Well, then, ye may depend upon it, there was nae time to be lost. And now here is enough said. Gang you to your sleep, lad, and I'll watch." Accordingly, I lay down to sleep. A little peaty earth had drifted in between the top of the two rocks, and some bracken grew there to be a bed to me. The last thing I heard was still the crying of the eagles. I dare say it would be 9 in the morning when I was roughly awakened, and found Alan's hand pressed upon my mouth. "Wheesht," he whispered. "You were snoring." "Well," said I, surprised at his anxious and dark face. "And why not?" He peered over the edge of the rock and signed to me to do the like. It was now high day, cloudless, and very hot. The valley was as clear as in a picture. About half a mile up the water was a camp of redcoats. A big fire blazed in their midst, at which some were cooking. And nearby, on the top of a rock about as high as ours, there stood a sentry, with the sun sparkling on his arms. All the way down along the riverside were posted other sentries, here near together, there widely scattered. Some planted like the first, on places of command, some on the ground level and marching and countermarching, so as to meet halfway. Higher up the glen, where the ground was more open, the chain of posts was continued by horse soldiers, whom we could see in the distance riding to and fro. Lower down, the infantry continued. But as the stream was suddenly swelled by the confluence of considerable burn, they were more widely set and only watched the fords and stepping stones. I took but one look at them and ducked again into my place. It was strange indeed to see this valley, which had lain so solitary in the hour of dawn, bristling with arms and dotted with the red coats and breeches. "Ye see," said Alan, "this was what I was afraid of Davy, that they would watch the burnside. They began to come in about 2 hours ago, and, man, but you're a grand hand at the sleeping. We're in a narrow place. If they get up the sides of the hill, they could easy spy us with a glass. But they'll only keep in for the valley. We'll do yet. The posts are thinner down the water. And come night, we'll try our hand at getting by them." "And what are we to do till night?" I asked. "Lie here," says he, and bursel, that one good Scotch word, bursel, was indeed the most of the story of the day that we had now to pass. You are to remember that we lay on the bare top of a rock, like scones upon a girdle. The sun beat upon us cruelly. The rock grew so heated, a man could scarce endure the touch of it, and the little patch of earth and fern which kept cooler was only large enough for one at a time. We took turn about to lie on the naked rock, which was indeed like the position of that saint that was martyred on a gridiron, and it ran in my mind how strange it was that in the same climate and at only a few days' distance I should have suffered so cruelly, first from cold upon my island and now from heat upon this rock. All the while we had no water, only raw brandy for a drink, which was worse than nothing, but we kept the bottle as cool as we could, burying it in the earth, and got some relief by bathing our breasts and temples. The soldiers kept stirring all day in the bottom of the valley, now changing guard, now in patrolling parties, hunting among the rocks. These lay round in so great a number that to look for men among them was like looking for a needle in a bottle of hay. And being so hopeless a task, it was gone about with the less care. Yet we could see the soldiers pike their bayonets among the heather, which sent a cold thrill into my vitals. And they would sometimes hang about our rock, so that we scarce dare to breathe. It was in this way that I first heard the right English speech. One fellow, as he went by, actually clapping his hand upon the sunny face of the rock on which we lay, and plucking it off again with an oath. "I tell you it's O.T., says he, and I was amazed at the clipping tones and the odd sing-song in which he spoke, and no less at that strange trick of dropping out the letter H. To be sure, I had heard Ransom, but he had taken his ways from all sorts of people, and spoke so imperfectly at the best that I set down the most of it to childishness. My surprise was all the greater to hear that manner of speaking in the mouth of a grown man, and indeed I have never grown used to it, nor yet altogether with the English grammar, as perhaps a very critical I might hear and there spy out even in these memoirs. The tediousness and pain of these hours upon the rock grew only the greater as the day went on, the rock getting still the hotter and the sun fiercer. There were giddiness and sickness and sharp pangs like rheumatism to be supported. I minded then, and have often minded since, on the lines in our Scotch psalm. The moon by night thee shall not smite, nor yet the sun by day. And indeed it was only by God's blessing that we were neither of us sun-smitten. At last, about 2, it was beyond men's bearing, and there was now temptation to resist, as well as pain to thole. For the sun being now got a little into the west, there came a patch of shade on the east side of our rock, which was the side shelter from the soldiers. "As well one death as another," said Alan, and slipped over the edge and dropped on the ground on the shadowy side. I followed him at once, and instantly fell all my length. So weak was I and so giddy with that long exposure. Here, then, we lay for an hour or two, aching from head to foot, as weak as water, and lying quite naked to the eye of any soldier who should have strolled that way. None came, however, all passing by on the other side, so that our rock continued to be our shield even in this new position. Presently we began again to get a little strength, and as the soldiers were now lying closer along the riverside, Alan proposed that we should try a start. I was by this time afraid of but one thing in the world, and that was to be set back upon the rock. Anything else was welcome to me. So we got ourselves at once in marching order, and began to slip from rock to rock one after the other, now crawling flat on our bellies in the shade, now making a run for it, heart in mouth. The soldiers, having searched the side of the valley after a fashion, and being perhaps somewhat sleepy with the sultriness of the afternoon, had now laid by much of their vigilance, and stood dozing at their posts or only kept a lookout along the banks of the river, so that in this way, keeping down the valley and at the same time toward the mountains, we drew steadily away from their neighborhood. But the business was the most wearing I had ever taken part in. A man had need 100 eyes in every part of him, to keep concealed in that uneven country, and within cry of so many and scattered sentries, when we must pass an open place. Quickness was not all, but swift judgment not only the lie of the whole country, but the solidity of every stone on which we must set foot. For the afternoon was now fallen so breathless that the rolling of a pebble sounded abroad like a pistol shot, and would start the echo calling among the hills and cliffs. By sundown we had made some distance, even by our slow rate of progress, though to be sure the sentry on the rock was still plainly in our view. But now we came on something that put all fears out of season, and that was a deep rushing burn that tore down in that part to join the Glen River. At the sight of this we cast ourselves on the ground and plunged head and shoulders in water, and I cannot tell which was a more pleasant, the great shock as the cool stream went over us, or the greed with which we drank of it. We lay there, for the banks hit us, drank again and again, bathed our chests, let our wrists trail in the running water till they ached with the chill, and at last, being wonderfully renewed, we got out the meal bag and made drammock in the iron pan. This, though it is but cold water mingled with oatmeal, yet makes a good enough dish for a hungry man, and where there are no means of making fire, or, as in our case, good reason for not making one, it is the chief standby of those who have taken to the heather. As soon as the shadow of the night had fallen, we set forth again, at first with the same caution, but presently with more boldness, standing our full height and stepping out at a good pace of walking. The way was very intricate, lying up the steep side of mountains and along the brows of cliffs. Clouds had come with the sunset, and the night was dark and cool, so that I walked without much fatigue, but in continual fear of falling and rolling down the mountains, and with no guess of our direction. The moon rose at last and found us still on the road. It was in its last quarter and was long beset with clouds, but after a while shone out and showed me many dark heads of mountains, and was reflected far underneath us on the narrow arm of the sea loch. At this sight we both paused. I struck with wonder to find myself so high and walking, as it seemed to me, upon clouds. Alan to make sure of his direction. Seemingly he was well pleased, and he must certainly have judged us out of earshot of all our enemies. For throughout the rest of our night march he beguiled away with whistling of many tunes, warlike, merry, plaintive, real tunes that made the foot go faster, tunes of my own south country that made me fain to be home from my adventures, and all these on the great, dark desert mountains, making company upon the way. Chapter 21, The Flight in the Heather. The hue of Coronachy. Early as day comes in the beginning of July, it was still dark when we reached our destination, a cleft in the head of a great mountain, with a water running through the midst, and upon the one hand a shallow cave in a rock. Birches grew there in a thin, pretty wood, which a little farther on was changed into a wood of pines. The burn was full of trout, the wood of cushat doves. On the open side of the mountain beyond, whaups would be always whistling, and cuckoos were plentiful. From the mouth of the cleft we looked down upon a part of a moor, and on the sea loch that divides that country from Appin, and this from so great a height as made it my continual wonder and pleasure to sit and behold them. The name of the cleft was the hue of Coronachy, and although from its height and being so near upon the sea, it was often beset with clouds, yet it was on the whole a pleasant place, and the 5 days we lived in it went happily. We slept in the cave, making our bed of heather bushes which we cut for that purpose, and covering ourselves with Alan's greatcoat. There was a low concealed place, in a turning of the glen, where we were so bold as to make fire, so that we could warm ourselves when the clouds set in, and cook hot porridge, and grill the little trouts that we caught with our hands under the stones and overhanging banks to burn. This was indeed our chief pleasure in business, and not only to save our meal against worse times, but with a rivalry that much amused us. We spent a great part of our days at the waterside, stripped to the waist and groping about, or, as they say, guddling for these fish. The largest we got might have been 1/4 of a pound, but they were of good flesh and flavor, and when broiled upon the coals, lacked only a little salt to be delicious. In any by-time Alan must teach me to use my sword, for my ignorance had much distressed him. And I think besides, as I had sometimes the upper hand in the fishing, he was not sorry to turn to an exercise where he had so much the upper hand of me. He made it somewhat more of a pain than need have been, for he stormed at me all through the lessons in a very violent manner of scolding, and would push me so close that I made sure he must run me through the body. I was often tempted to turn tail, but held my ground for all that, and got some profit from my lessons. It was but to stand on guard with an assured countenance, which is often all that is required. So, though I could never in the least please my master, I was not altogether displeased with myself. In the meanwhile, you are not to suppose that we neglected our chief business, which was to get away. It will be many a long day, Alan said to me on our first morning, before the redcoats think upon seeking Coronackie. So now we must get word sent to James, and he must find the siller for us. And how shall we send that word, says I? We are here in a desert place, which yet we dare not leave, and unless you get the fowls of the air to be your messengers, I see not what we shall be able to do. Aye, said Alan, ye are a man of small contrivance, David. Thereupon he fell in a muse, looking in the embers of the fire, and presently, getting a piece of wood, he fashioned it in a cross, the 4 ends of which he blackened on the coals. Then he looked at me a little shyly. Could ye lend me my button? Says he. It seems a strange thing to ask a gift again, but I own I am laid to cut another. I gave him the button, whereupon he strung on a strip of his greatcoat, which he had used to bind the cross, and tying a little sprig of birch in another fir, he looked upon his work with satisfaction. Now, said he, there's a little clock in what is called a hamlet in the English, not very far from Coronackie, and it has the name of Colisnacoan. There are living many friends of mine whom I could trust with my life, and some that I am no just so sure of. Ye see, David, there will be money set upon our heads. James himself is to set money on them. And as for the Campbells, they would never spare siller where there was a Stewart to be hurt. If it was otherwise, I would go down to Colisnacoan whatever, and trust my life into these people's hands as lightly as I would trust another with my glove. But being so, said I, being so, said he, I would as lief they didn't see me. There's bad folk everywhere, and what's far worse, weak ones. So when it comes dark again, I will steal down into that clockin, and set this that I have been making in the window of a good friend of mine, John Breck a bowman of Appins. A bowman is a tenant who takes stock from the landlord and shares with him the increase. With all my heart, says I, and if he finds it, what is he to think? Well, says Alan, I wish he was a man of more penetration, for by my troth I am afraid he will make little enough of it. But this is what I have in my mind. This cross is something in the nature of the crossdary or fiery cross, which is a signal of gathering in our clans. Yet he will know well enough the clan is not to rise, for there is standing in his window, and no word with it. So he will say to himself, the clan is not to rise, but there is something. Then he will see my button, and that was Duncan Stewart's. And then he will say to himself, the son of Duncan is in the heather and has need of me. Well, said I, it may be, but even supposing so, there is a good deal of heather between here and the Forth. And that is a very true word, says Alan. But then John Breck will see the sprig of birch and the sprig of pine, and he will say to himself, if he is a man of any penetration at all, which I misdoubt, Alan will be lying in a wood which is both of pines and birches. Then he will think to himself, that is not so very rife hereabout, and then he will come and give us a look up in Coronackie. And if he does not, David, the devil may fly away with him, for what I care, for he will no be worth the salt to his porridge. Man, said I, drolling with him a little, you're very ingenious, but would it not be simpler for you to write him a few words in black and white? "And that is an excellent observe, Mr. Balfour Shaws," says Alan, drolling with me. "And it would certainly be much simpler for me to write to him, but it would be a sore job for John Breck to read it. He would have to go to the school for 2-3 years, and it's possible we might be wearied waiting on him." So that night Alan carried down his fiery cross and set it in the bowman's window. He was troubled when he came back, for the dogs had barked and the folk run out from their houses, and he thought he had heard a clatter of arms and seen a redcoat come to one of the doors. On all accounts, we lay the next day in the borders of the wood and kept a close lookout, so that if it was John Breck that came we might be ready to guide him, and if it was the redcoats we should have time to get away. About noon a man was to be spied, straggling up the open side of the mountain in the sun, and looking round him as he came, from under his hand. No sooner had Alan seen him than he whistled. The man turned and came a little towards us. Then Alan would give another peep, and the man would come still nearer, and so by the sound of whistling, he was guided to the spot where we lay. He was a ragged, wild, bearded man, about 40, grossly disfigured with the smallpox, and looked both dull and savage. Although his English was very bad and broken, yet Alan, according to his very handsome use, whenever I was by, would suffer him to speak no Gaelic. Perhaps the strange language made him appear more backward than he really was, but I thought he had little goodwill to serve us, and what he had was a child of terror. Alan would have had him carry a message to James, but the bowman would hear of no message. "She would forget it," he said in his screaming voice, and would either have a letter or wash his hands of us. I thought Alan would be gravelled at that, for we lacked the means of writing in that desert. But he was a man of more resources than I knew. Searched the wood until he found the quill of a cushat dove, which he shaped into a pen, made himself a kind of ink with gunpowder from his horn and water from the running stream, and tearing a corner from his French military commission, which he carried in his pocket, like a talisman to keep him from the gallows, he sat down and wrote as follows: "Dear kinsman, please send the money by the bearer to the place he kens of. Your affectionate cousin, A.S." This he entrusted to the bowman, who promised to make what manner of speed he best could, and carried it off with him down the hill. He was 3 full days gone, but about 5 in the evening of the 3rd, we heard a whistling in the wood, which Alan answered, and presently the bowman came up the waterside, looking for us right and left. He seemed less sulky than before, and indeed he was no doubt well pleased he got to the end of such a dangerous commission. He gave us the news of the country, that was alive with redcoats, that arms were being found, and poor folk brought in trouble daily, and that James and some of his servants were already clapped in prison at Fort William, under strong suspicion of complicity. It seemed it was noise on all sides that Alan Breck had fired the shot, and there was a bill issued for both him and me, with £100 reward. This was all as bad as could be, and the little note the bowman had carried us from Mrs. Stewart was of a miserable sadness. In it she besought Alan not to let himself be captured, assuring him, if he fell in the hands of the troops, both he and James were no better than dead men. The money she had sent was all that she could beg or borrow, and she prayed heaven we could be doing with it. Lastly, she said, she enclosed us one of the bills in which we were described. This we looked upon with great curiosity and not a little fear, partly as a man may look at a mirror, partly as he might look into the barrel of an enemy's gun to judge if it be truly aimed. Alan was advertised as a small, pockmarked, active man of 35 or thereby, dressed in a feathered hat, a French side coat of blue with silver buttons, and lace a great deal tarnished, a red waistcoat and breeches of black shag, and I as a tall, strong lad about 18, wearing an old blue coat, very ragged, an old Highland bonnet, a long homespun waistcoat, blue breeches, his legs bare, low country shoes, wanting the toes. Speaks like a lowlander and has no beard. Alan was well enough pleased to see his finery, so fully remembered and set down. Only when he came to the word tarnish, he looked upon his lace like one a little mortified. As for myself, I thought I cut a miserable figure in the bill, and yet was well enough pleased too, for since I had changed these rags, the description had ceased to be a danger and become a source of safety. "Alan," said I, "you should change your clothes." "Nah, troth," said Alan, "I have nae others. A fine sight I would be, if I went back to France in a bonnet." This put a second reflection in my mind, that if I were to separate from Alan and his telltale clothes, I should be safe against arrest, and might go openly about my business. Nor was this all. For suppose I was arrested when I was alone, there was little against me. But suppose I was taken in company with a reputed murderer, my case would begin to be grave. For generosity's sake, I dare not speak my mind upon this head, but I thought of it none the less. I thought of it all the more, too, when the bowman brought out a green purse with her guineas in gold, and the best part of another in small change. True, it was more than I had, but then Alan, with less than 5 guineas, had to get as far as France. I, with my less than 2, not beyond Queensferry. So that taking things in their proportion, Alan's society was not only a peril to my life, but a burden on my purse. But there was no thought of the sort in the honest head of my companion. He believed he was serving, helping, and protecting me. And what could I do but hold my peace and chafe, and take my chance of it? It's little enough, said Alan, putting the purse in his pocket. But it'll do my business. And now, John Breck, if you will hand me over my button, this gentleman and me will be for taking the road. But the bowman, after feeling about in a hairy purse that hung in front of him in the Highland manner, though he wore otherwise a lowland habit with sea trousers, began to roll his eyes strangely, and at last said, "Her Nainsel will lost it," meaning he thought he had lost it. "What?" cried Alan. "You will lose my button. That was my father before me. Now I will tell you what is in my mind, John Breck. It is in my mind this is the worst day's work that ever ye did since ye was born." And as Alan spoke, he set his hands on his knees and looked at the bowman with a smiling mouth, and that dancing light in his eyes that meant mischief to his enemies. Perhaps the bowman was honest enough. Perhaps he had meant to cheat and then, finding himself alone with 2 of us in a desert place, cast back to honesty as being safer. At least, and all at once, he seemed to find that button and handed it to Alan. "Well, and it is a good thing for the honor of the McColls," said Alan, and then to me, "Here's my button back again, and I thank you for parting with it, which is of a piece with all your friendships to me." Then he took the warmest parting of the bowman. "For," says he, "ye have done very well by me, and set your neck at a venture, and I will always give you the name of a good man." Lastly, the bowman took himself off by one way, and Alan and I, getting our chattels together, struck into another to resume our flight. Chapter 22, the flight in the heather, the moor. 7 hours incessant, hard traveling brought us early in the morning to the end of a range of mountains. In front of us there lay a piece of low, broken desert land, which we must now cross. The sun was not long up and shone straight in our eyes. A little, thin mist went up from the face of the moorland like a smoke, so that, as Alan said, there might have been 20 squadron of dragoons there, and we none the wiser. We sat down, therefore, in a hollow of the hillside till the mist should have risen, and made ourselves a dish of drammock, and held a council of war. "David," said Alan, "this is the kittle bit. Shall we lie here till it comes night, or shall we risk it and stave on ahead?" "Well," said I am tired indeed, but I could walk as far again, if that was all." "Aye, but it isn't," said Alan. "Nor yet the half. This is how we stand. Appin's fair death to us. To the south it's all Campbell's, and no to be thought of. To the north, well, there's no muckle to be gained by going north, neither for you, that wants to get to Queensferry, nor yet for me, that wants to get to France. Well, then we can strike east." "East be it," says I, quite cheerily, but I was thinking to myself, "Oh, man, if you would only take one point of the compass and let me take any other, it would be the best for both of us." "Well, then east, ye see we have the muirs," said Alan. "Once there, David, it's mere pitch and toss. Out on yon bald, naked, flat place, where can a body turn to? Let the redcoats come over a hill. They can spy you miles away, and the sorrows in their horses' heels, they would soon ride you down. It's no good place, David, and I'm free to say, it's worse by daylight than by dark. Alan," said I, "hear my way of it. Appin's death for us. We have none too much money, nor yet meal. The longer they seek, the nearer they may guess where we are. It's all a risk, and I give my word to go ahead until we drop." Alan was delighted. "There are whiles," said he, "when ye are altogether too canny and wiggish to be company for a gentleman like me. But there come other whiles when ye show yoursel a metal spark, and it's then, David, that I love ye like a brother." The mist rose and died away, and showed us that country lying as waste as the sea, only the moorfowl and the peewees crying upon it, and far over to the east, a herd of deer, moving like dots. Much it was red with heather, much of the rest broken up with bogs and hags and peaty pools. Some had been burnt black in a heath fire, and in another place there was quite a forest of dead firs, standing like skeletons. A wearier-looking desert man never saw, but at least it was clear of troops, which was our point. We went down accordingly into the waste, and began to make our toilsome and devious travel toward the eastern verge. There were the tops of mountains all round, you are to remember, from whence we might be spied at any moment. So it behoved us to keep in the hollow parts of the moor, and when these turned aside from our direction to move upon its naked face with infinite care. Sometimes, for half an hour together, we must crawl from one heather bush to another, as hunters do when they are hard upon the deer. It was a clear day again with a blazing sun. The water in the brandy bottle was soon gone, and altogether, if I had guessed what it would be to crawl half the time upon my belly, and to walk much of the rest stooping nearly to the knees, I should certainly have held back from such a killing enterprise. Toiling and resting and toiling again, we wore away the morning, and about noon lay down in a thick bush of heather to sleep. Alan took the first watch, and it seemed to me I had scarce closed my eyes before I was shaken up to take the second. We had no clock to go by, and Alan stuck a sprig of heath in the ground to serve instead, so that as soon as the shadow of the bush should fall so far to the east, I might know to rouse him. But I was by this time so weary that I could have slept 12 hours at a stretch. I had the taste of sleep in my throat. My joints slept even when my mind was waking. The hot smell of the heather and the drone of the wild bees were like possets to me, and every now and again I would give a jump and find I had been dozing. The last time I woke, I seemed to come back from farther away, and thought the sun had taken a great start in the heavens. I looked at the sprig of heath, and at that I could have cried aloud, for I saw I had betrayed my trust. My head was nearly turned with fear and shame, and at what I saw, when I looked out around me on the moor, my heart was like dying in my body. For sure enough, a body of horse soldiers had come down during my sleep, and were drawing near to us from the southeast, spread out in the shape of fan, and riding their horses to and fro in the deep parts of the heather. When I waked Alan, he glanced first at the soldiers, then at the mark and position of the sun, and knitted his brows with a sudden, quick look, both ugly and anxious, which was all the reproach I had of him. "What are we to do now?" I asked. "We'll have to play at being hares," said he. "Do ye see yon mountain?" Pointing to one on the northeastern sky. "Aye," said I. "Well then," says he, "let us strike for that. Its name is Ben Alder. It is a wild desert mountain full of hills and hollows, and if we can win to it before the morn, we may do yet." "But, Alan," cried I, "that will take us across the very coming of the soldiers." "I ken that fine," said he, "but if we are driven back on Appin, we are two dead men. So now, David, man, be brisk." With that he began to run forward on his hands and knees with an incredible quickness, as though it were his natural way of going. All the time, too, he kept winding in and out in the lower parts of the moorland where we were the best concealed. Some of these had been burned or at least scathed with fire, and there rose in our faces, which were close to ground, a blinding, choking dust as fine as smoke. The water was long out, and this posture of running on the hands and knees brings an overmastering weakness and weariness, so that the joints ache and the wrists faint under your weight. Now and then, indeed, where was a big bush of heather, we lay a while and panted, and putting aside the leaves, looked back at the dragoons. They had not spied us, for they held straight on, a half-troop, I think, covering about 2 miles of ground, and beating it mighty thoroughly as they went. I had awakened just in time, a little later, and we must have fled in front of them, instead of escaping on one side. Even as it was, the least misfortune might betray us, and now and again, when a grouse rose out of the heather with a clap of wings, we lay as still as the dead and were afraid to breathe. The aching and faintness of my body, the labor in my heart, the soreness of my hands, and the smarting of my throat and eyes and continual smoke of dust and ashes, had soon grown to be so unbearable that I would gladly have given up. Nothing but the fear of Alan lent me enough of a false kind of courage to continue. As for himself, and you are to bear in mind that he was cumbered with greatcoat, he had first turned crimson, but as time went on the redness began to be mingled with patches of white. His breath cried and whistled as it came, and his voice, when he whispered his observations in my ear during our halts, sounded like nothing human. Yet he seemed in no way dashed in spirits, nor did he at all abate in his activity. so that I was driven to marvel at the man's endurance. At length, in the first gloaming of the night, we heard a trumpet sound, and looking back from among the heather, saw the troop beginning to collect. A little after, they had built a fire and camped for the night about the middle of the waste. At this I begged and besought that we might lie down and sleep. "There shall be no sleep tonight," said Alan. "From now on, these weary dragoons of yours will keep the crown of the muirland, and none will get out of Appin but winged fowls. We got through in the nick of time, and shall we jeopard what we've gained? Nah, nah. When the day comes, it shall find you and me in a fast place on Ben Alder." "Alan," I said, "it's not the want of will, it's the strength that I want. If I could, I would, but as sure as I'm alive, I cannot." "Very well, then," said Alan, "I'll carry ye." I looked to see if he were jesting. But no, the little man was in dead earnest, and the sight of so much resolution shamed me. "Lead away," said I, "I'll follow." He gave me one look as much as to say, "Well done, David," and off he set again at his top speed. It grew cooler and even a little darker, but not much with the coming of the night. The sky was cloudless. It was still early in July and pretty far north. In the darkest part of that night, you would have needed pretty good eyes to read, but for all that, I have often seen it darker in a winter midday. Heavy dew fell and drenched the moor like rain, and this refreshed me for a while. When we stopped to breathe, and I had time to see all about me, the clearness and sweetness of the night, the shapes of the hills like things asleep, and the fire dwindling away behind us, like a bright spot in the midst of the moor, anger would come upon me in a clap that I must still drag myself in agony and eat the dust like a worm. By what I have read in books, I think few that have held a pen were ever really wearied, or they would write of it more strongly. I had no care of my life, neither past nor future, and I scarce remember there was such a lad as David Balfour. I did not think of myself, but just of each fresh step which I was sure would be my last, with despair, and of Alan, who was the cause of it, with hatred. Alan was in the right trade as a soldier. This is the officer's part to make men continue to do things they know not wherefore, and when, if the choice was offered, they would lie down where they were and be killed. And I dare say I would have made a good enough private, for in these last hours it never occurred to me that I had any choice but just to obey as long as I was able, and die obeying. Day began to come in after years, I thought, and by that time we were past the greatest danger, and could walk upon our feet like men, instead of crawling like brutes. But, dear heart have mercy, what a pair we must have made, going double like old grandfathers, stumbling like babes, and as white as dead folk. Never a word passed between us. Each set his mouth and kept his eyes in front of him, and lifted up his foot and set it down again, like people lifting weights at a country play, all the while with the moorfowl crying peep in the heather, and the light coming slowly clearer in the east. Village fair. I say Alan did as I did. Not that ever I looked at him, for I had enough ado to keep my feet, but because it is plain he must have been as stupid with weariness as myself, and looked as little where we were going, or we should not have walked into an ambush like blind men. It fell in this way. We were going down a heathery brae, Alan leading and I following a pace or two behind, like a fiddler and his wife, when upon a sudden the heather gave a rustle. 3 or 4 ragged men leaped out, and the next moment we were lying on our backs, each with a dirk at his throat. I don't think I cared. The pain of this rough handling was quite swallowed up by the pains of which I was already full, and I was too glad to have stopped walking to mind about a dirk. I lay looking up in the face of the man that held me, and I mind his face was black with the sun, and his eyes very light, but I was not afraid of him. I heard Alan and another whispering in the Gaelic, and what they said was all one to me. Then the dirks were put up, our weapons were taken away, and we were set face to face, sitting in the heather. "They are Clooney's men," said Alan. "We couldn't have fallen better. We're just abide here with these, which are his out sentries, till they can get word to the chief of my arrival." Now Clooney Macpherson, the chief of the clan Vurich, had been one of the leaders of the great rebellion 6 years before. There was a price on his life, and I had supposed him long ago in France, with the rest of the heads of that desperate party. Even tired as I was, the surprise of what I heard half wakened me. "What?" I cried. "Is Clooney still here?" "Aye, is he so?" said Alan. "Still in his own country, and kept by his own clan. King George can do no more." I think I would have asked farther, but Alan gave me the put-off. "I am rather wearied," he said, "and I would like fine to get asleep." And without more words, he rolled on his face in a deep heather bush and seemed to sleep at once. There was no such thing possible for me. You have heard grasshoppers whirring in the grass in the summertime? Well, I had no sooner closed my eyes than my body, and above all my head, belly, and wrists, seemed to be filled with whirring grasshoppers, and I must open my eyes again at once, and tumble and toss, and sit up and lie down, and look at the sky which dazzled me, or at Clooney's wild and dirty sentries, peering out over the top of Bray and chattering to each other in the Gaelic. That was all the rest I had, until the messenger returned, when, as it appeared that Clooney would be glad to receive us, we must get once more upon our feet and set forward. Alan was in excellent good spirits, much refreshed by his sleep, very hungry, and looking pleasantly forward to a dram and a dish of hot collops, of which, it seems, the messenger had brought him word. For my part, it made me sick to hear of eating. I had been dead heavy before, and now I felt a kind of dreadful lightness, which would not suffer me to walk. I drifted like a gossamer. The ground seemed to me a cloud, the hills a featherweight, the air to have a current, like a running burn, which carried me to and fro. With all that, a sort of horror of despair sat on my mind, so that I could have wept at my own helplessness. I saw Alan knitting his brows at me, and supposed it was in anger, and that gave me a pang of light-headed fear, like what a child may have. I remember, too, that I was smiling, and could not stop smiling, hard as I tried, for I thought it was out of place at such a time. But my good companion had nothing in his mind but kindness, and the next moment, two of the gillies had me by the arms, and I began to be carried forward with great swiftness, or so it appeared to me, although I dare say it was slowly enough in truth, through a labyrinth of dreary glens and hollows, and into the heart of that dismal mountain of Ben Alder. Chapter 23, Clooney's Cage. He came at last to the foot of an exceeding steep wood, which scrambled up a craggy hillside, and was crowned by a naked precipice. "It's here," said one of the guides, and we struck uphill. The trees clung upon the slope, like sailors on the shrouds of a ship, and their trunks were like the round of a ladder by which we mounted. Quite at the top, and just before the rocky face of the cliff sprang above the foliage, we found that strange house which was known in the country as Clooney's Cage. The trunks of several trees had been wattled across, the intervals strengthened with stakes, and the ground behind this barricade leveled up with earth to make the floor. A tree, which grew out from a hillside, was the living center beam of the roof. The walls were of wattle and covered with moss. The whole house had something of an egg shape, and it half hung, half stood in that steep hillside thicket, like a wasp's nest in a green hawthorn. Within, it was large enough to shelter 5 or 6 persons with some comfort. A projection of the cliff had been cunningly employed to be the fireplace, and the smoke rising against the face of the rock, and being not dissimilar in color, readily escaped notice from below. This was but one of Clooney's hiding places. He had caves, besides, and underground chambers in several parts of his country, and following the reports of his scouts, he moved from one to another as the soldiers drew near or moved away. By this manner of living, and thanks to the affection of his clan, he had not only stayed all this time in safety, while so many others had fled or been taken and slain, but stayed 4 or 5 years longer, and only went to France at last by the express command of his master. There he soon died, and it is strange to reflect that he may have regretted his cage upon Ben Alder. When we came to the door, he was seated by his rock chimney, watching a gilly about some cookery. He was mighty plainly habited, with a knitted nightcap drawn over his ears, and smoked a foul cutty pipe, for all that he had the manners of a king, and it was quite a sight to see him rise out of his place to welcome us. "Well, Mr. Stewart, come awa, sir," said he, "and bring your friend that as yet I dinna ken the name of." "And how is yourself, Clooney?" said Alan. "I hope ye do brawly, sir, and I am proud to see ye, and a present to ye, my friend the Laird of Shaw's, Mr. David Balfour." Alan never referred to my estate without a touch of a sneer, when we were alone, but with strangers, he rang the words out like a herald. "Stepping by, the both of ye, gentlemen," says Clooney, "I make ye welcome to my house, which is a queer, rude place for certain, but one where I have entertained a royal personage, Mr. Stewart. Ye doubtless ken the personage I have in my eye. We'll take a dram for luck, and as soon as this handless man of mine has the collops ready, we'll dine and take a hand at the cartace as gentlemen should." My life is a bit dreeg, says he, pouring out the brandy. I see little company, and sit and twirl my thumbs, and mine upon a great day that is gone by, and weary for another great day that we all hope will be upon the road. And so here's a toast to ye, the Restoration. Thereupon we all touched glasses and drank. I am sure I wish no ill to King George, and if he had been there himself in proper person, it's like he would have done as I did. No sooner had I taken out the drain than I felt hugely better, and could look on and listen, still a little mistily perhaps, but no longer with the same groundless horror and distress of mind. It was certainly a strange place, and we had a strange host. In his long hiding, Clooney had grown to have all manner of precise habits, like those of an old maid. He had a particular place, where no one else must sit. The cage was arranged in a particular way, which none must disturb. Cookery was one of his chief fancies, and even while he was greeting us in, he kept an eye to the collops. It appears he sometimes visited or received visits from his wife and one or two of his nearest friends under the cover of night, but for the more part lived quite alone, and communicated only with his sentinels and the gillies that waited on in the cage. The first thing in the morning, one of them, who was a barber, came and shaved him, and gave him the news of the country, of which he was moderately greedy. There was no end to his questions. He put them as earnestly as a child, and at some of the answers, laughed out of all bounds of reason, and would break out again laughing at the mere memory, hours after the barber was gone. To be sure, there might have been a purpose in his questions, for though he was thus sequestered, and like the other landed gentlemen of Scotland, stripped by the late Act of Parliament of legal powers, he still exercised a patriarchal justice in his clan. Disputes were brought to him in his hiding hole to be decided, and the men of his country, who would have snapped their fingers at the court of session, laid aside revenge and paid down money at the bare word of his forfeited and hunted outlaw. When he was angered, which was often enough, he gave his commands and breathed threats of punishment like any king, and his gillies trembled and crouched away from him like children before a hasty father. With each of them, as he entered, he ceremoniously shook hands, both parties touching their bonnets at the same time in a military manner. Altogether, I had a fair chance to see some of the inner workings of a Highland clan, and this would prescribe fugitive chief, his country conquered, the troops riding upon all sides in quest of him, sometimes within a mile of where he lay, and when the least of the ragged fellows whom he raided and threatened could have made a fortune by betraying him. On that first day, as soon as the collops were ready, Clooney gave it with his own hand a squeeze of a lemon, for he was well supplied with luxuries, and bade us draw into our meal. "They," said he, meaning the collops, "are such as I gave his Royal Highness in this very house," baiting the lemon juice, for at that time we were glad to get the meat and never fashed for kitchen. Indeed, there were mere dragoons and lemons in my country in the year 46. Condiment. I do not know if the collops were truly very good, but my heart rose against the sight of them, and I could eat but little. All the while Clooney entertained us with stories of Prince Charlie's stay in the cage, giving us the very words of speakers, and rising from his place to show us where they stood. By these, I gathered the prince was a gracious, spirited boy, like the son of a race of polite kings, but not so wise as Solomon. I gathered, too, that while he was in the cage, he was often drunk, so the fault that has since, by all accounts, made such a wreck of him, had even then begun to show itself. We were no sooner done eating than Clooney brought out an old-thumbed, greasy pack of cards, such as you may find in a mean inn, and his eyes brightened in his face as he proposed that we should fall to playing. Now, this was one of the things I had been brought up to eschew like disgrace, it being held by my father neither the part of Christian nor yet of a gentleman to set his own livelihood and fish for that of others, on the cast of painted pasteboard. To be sure, I might have pleaded my fatigue, which was excuse enough, but I thought it behoved that I should bear a testimony. I must have got very red in the face, but I spoke steadily, and told him I had no call to be a judge of others, but for my own part, it was a matter in which I had no clearness. Clooney stopped mingling the cards. "What in Deal's name is this?" says he. "What kind of Whiggish, canting talk is this for the house of Clooney Macpherson?" "I will put my hand in the fire for Mr. Balfour," says Alan. "He is an honest and a mettled gentleman, and I would have ye bear in mind who says it." "I bear a king's name," says he, cocking his hat, "and I and any that I call friend are company for the best. But the gentleman is tired and should sleep, if he has no mind to the card taste. It will never hinder you and me, and I'm fit and willing, sir, to play any game that ye can name. Sir, says Clooney, in this poor house of mine, I would have you to ken that any gentleman may follow his pleasure. If your friend would like to stand on his head, he is welcome, and if either he or you or any other man is not precisely satisfied, I will be proud to step outside with him. I had no will that these two friends should cut their throats for my sake. Sir, said I am very wearied, as Alan says, and what's more, as you are a man that likely has sons of your own, I may tell you it was a promise to my father. Say nay mayor, said Clooney, and pointed me to a bed of heather in a corner of the cage. For all that he was displeased enough, looked at me askance, and grumbled when he looked. And indeed it must be owned that both my scruples and the words in which I declared them smacked somewhat of the Covenanter, and were little in their place among wild Highland Jacobites. What with the brandy and the venison, a strange heaviness had come over me, and I had scarce lain down upon the bed before I fell into a kind of trance, in which I continued almost the whole time of our stay in the cage. Sometimes I was broad awake and understood what passed. Sometimes I only heard voices or men snoring, like the voice of Silly River, and the plaids upon the wall dwindled down and swelled out again, like firelight shadows on the roof. I must sometimes have spoken or cried out, for I remember I was now in a maze of being answered, yet I was conscious of no particular nightmare, only a general, black, abiding horror, a horror of the place I was in, and the bed I lay in, and the plaids on the wall, and the voices, and the fire, and myself. The barber Gilly, who was a doctor too, was called and prescribed for me, but as he spoke in the Gaelic, I understood not a word of his opinion, and was too sick even to ask for a translation. I knew well enough I was ill, and that was all I cared about. I paid little heed while I lay in this poor pass. But Alan and Clooney were most of the time at the cards, and I am clear that Alan must have begun by winning, for I remember sitting up and seeing them hard at it, and a great glittering pile of as much as 60 or 100 guineas on the table. It looked strange enough to see all this wealth in a nest upon a cliffside, waddled about growing trees. And even then, I thought it seemed deep water for Alan to be riding, who had no better battle horse than a green purse and a matter of £5. The luck, it seems, changed on the second day. About noon I was wakened as usual for dinner, and as usual refused to eat, and was given a dram with some bitter infusion which the barber had prescribed. The sun was shining in at the open door of the cage, and this dazzled and offended me. Clooney sat at the table, biting the pack of cards. Alan had stooped over the bed, and had his face close to my eyes, to which, troubled as they were with the fever, it seemed of the most shocking bigness. He asked me for a loan of my money. "What for?" said I. "Oh, just for a loan," said he. "But why?" I repeated, "I don't see." "Hut, David," said Alan, "you wouldn't grudge me a loan?" "I would, though, if I had had my senses." But all I thought of then was to get his face away, and I handed him my money. On the morning of the third day, when we had been 48 hours in the cage, I awoke with a great relief of spirits, very weak and weary indeed, but seeing things of the right size and with their honest, everyday appearance. I had a mind to eat, moreover, rose from bed of my own movement, and as soon as we had breakfasted, stepped to the entry of the cage and sat down outside in the top of the wood. It was a gray day with a cool, mild air, and I sat in a dream all morning, only disturbed by the passing by of Clooney's scouts and servants coming with provisions and reports, for as the coast was at that time clear, you might almost say he held court openly. When I returned, he and Alan had laid the cards aside and were questioning a Gilly, and the chief turned about and spoke to me in the Gaelic. "I have no Gaelic, sir," said I. Now, since the card question, everything I said or did had the power of annoying Clooney. "Your name has more sense than yourself, then," said he angrily, "for it's good Gaelic. But the point is this. My scout reports all clear in the south, and the question is, have ye the strength to go?" I saw a card on the table, but no gold, only a heap of little written papers, and these all on Clooney's side. Alan, besides, had an odd look, like a man not very well content, and I began to have a strong misgiving. "I do not know if I am as well as I should be," said I, looking at Alan, "but the little money we have has a long way to carry us." Alan took his under lip into his mouth and looked upon the ground. "David," says he at last. I've lost it. There's the naked truth. My money too, said I. Your money too, says Alan, with a groan. Ye shouldn't have given it me. I'm daft when I get to the cartes. Hoot toot, said Clooney. It was all daffing, it's all nonsense. Of course you'll have your money back again, and the double of it, if ye'll make so free with me. It would be a singular thing for me to keep it. It's not to be supposed that I would be any hindrance to gentlemen in your situation. That would be a singular thing, cries he, and began to pull gold out of his pocket with a mighty red face. Alan said nothing, only looked on the ground. Will you step to the door with me, sir? Said I. Clooney said he would be very glad, and followed me readily enough, but he looked flustered and put out. And now, sir, says I must first acknowledge your generosity. Nonsensical nonsense, cries Clooney. Where's the generosity? This is just a most unfortunate affair. But what would ye have me do, boxed up in this beast-skep of a cage of mine, but just set my friends to the cartes, when I can get them, and if they lose, of course, it's not to be supposed. And here he came to a pause. Yes, said I. If they lose, you give them back their money, and if they win, they carry away yours in their pouches. I have said before that I grant your generosity, but to me, sir, it's a very painful thing to be placed in this position. There was a little silence, in which Clooney seemed always as if he was about to speak, but said nothing. All the time he grew redder and redder in the face. I am a young man, said I, and I ask your advice. Advise me as you would your son. My friend fairly lost his money, after having fairly gained a far greater sum of yours. Can I accept it back again? Would that be the right part for me to play? Whatever I do, you can see for yourself it must be hard upon a man of any pride. It's rather hard on me, too, Mr. Balfour, said Clooney, and you give me very much the look of a man that has entrapped poor people to their hurt. I wouldn't have my friends come to any house of mine to accept affronts. No, he cried, with a sudden heat of anger, nor yet to give them. And so you see, sir, said I, there is something to be said upon my side, and this gambling is a very poor employ for gentlefolks. But I am still waiting your opinion. I am sure if ever Clooney hated any man, it was David Balfour. He looked me all over with a warlike eye, and I saw the challenge at his lips. But either my youth disarmed him, or perhaps his own sense of justice. Certainly it was a mortifying matter for all concerned, and not least Clooney. The more credit that he took it as he did. Mr. Balfour, said he, I think you are too nice and covenanting, but for all that you have the spirit of a very pretty gentleman. Upon my honest word, ye may take this money. It's what I would tell my son, and here's my hand along with it.